The stars twinkled brightly in the cold expanse of space, but something was different. A strange signal had begun to echo through the galaxy. It wasn't a distress call, nor a friendly greeting. It was humanity's final message, sent from Earth. The transmission was brief, sharp, and carried a tone of urgency no one had ever expected. On Earth, the message was received by the government's top officials, but it wasn't like any message they had ever dealt with before. It had a strange frequency, unlike anything their systems had encountered. It was a warning. But who was it meant for? Who had sent it? And why now? No one knew. Captain Elias stood in the command center of the Earth's defense station, staring at the screen. His eyes were wide with concern. He had been tracking signals from the farthest reaches of space for years, but this one was different. It was too strong to ignore. The signal carried a deep, almost haunting resonance. "Is the transmission complete?" Elias asked, his voice steady but tense. The technician, a young officer named Mai, looked at her console and nodded. "Yes, Captain." The message was brief, but it's clear. The signal originated from somewhere far beyond our solar system. It's not like any communication we've received before. And there's something else. It's been sent to every corner of the galaxy. A chilling silence fell over the room. This wasn't just a simple communication from Earth. The galaxy's farthest civilizations were now aware of humanity's presence, and that could be both a blessing and a curse. Elias rubbed his chin. "Is there any way to trace its source?" May's fingers flew across the controls. "We're trying, Captain. But the signal's too weak. It was meant to be a warning, not a call for help. And it's already spreading through the galaxy's communication networks. It's not just here on Earth anymore." Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The message seemed like a warning, but it was unlike anything humanity had prepared for. Most of the galaxy had ignored Earth for centuries, seeing humanity as weak, insignificant, a species still too young and unimportant to pose any threat. But this message, it had power. As the captain turned away from the screen, his thoughts raced. Who could send such a message? And why would they send it now? Something terrible was coming. He could feel it in his bones. The universe was about to change, and humanity might be at the center of it all. He wasn't wrong. Across the galaxy, in the far reaches of space, the enemy heard the message loud and clear. The alien races that had once ignored humanity's warnings were now forced to listen. They feared what the message might mean. The galaxy had long considered humanity a primitive species, too weak to be of any real consequence. But that perception was about to be shattered. The message continued to repeat across space. "We are humanity. Beware what comes after. This is your last warning. The stars will burn." As the message echoed, the aliens began to realize that humanity had something they had not expected. Something dangerous, something powerful. They knew the message was not just a warning. It was a declaration. Back at Earth's command center, Elias's fears were confirmed when another transmission came through. It was faint at first, barely reaching their monitoring systems. But then it became clearer, and what they heard made Elias's heart race. A voice, cold and menacing, spoke through the speaker. "The humans have sent their message. The galaxy will tremble. They do not know what they have awakened." Elias's grip tightened on the chair's armrests. This wasn't just some isolated warning. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Whoever, or whatever, had sent that message wasn't human. It was an ancient power, and humanity had just caught its attention. The universe had underestimated humanity for far too long. But now, it was too late. "Captain," May's voice broke through his thoughts. "We've managed to isolate a part of the signal. It seems to be a sequence, a pattern. It's leading us somewhere, Captain. Somewhere in the galaxy. It's like the message is calling us, or warning us." "Send everything to the fleet," Elias ordered. "We need to prepare for whatever comes next." As the final transmission repeated its chilling warning, Elias's mind raced. This was only the beginning. Something terrible was coming, and humanity might be the only species left to face it. The universe was no longer a quiet, peaceful place. It was a dangerous, uncertain expanse filled with ancient enemies and forgotten horrors. Humanity had just made itself known in a way no one could ignore, and whatever came next, the stars would burn. The final transmission had set the galaxy on edge. Across countless star systems, the message echoed, each word like a ripple through the cosmos. We are humanity. Beware what comes after. This is your last warning. The stars will burn. It was more than just a warning. It was a threat, one that shook the confidence of those who had long overlooked Earth and its people. Humanity had been known as a fledgling species, barely even a blip in the galaxy's grand history. But this single message changed everything. The alien civilizations that had thought themselves invincible suddenly found themselves questioning their assumptions. They had ignored humanity for so long, assuming that humans were nothing more than a nuisance, an insignificant race on a small, unimportant planet. But now, the stars themselves seemed to be warning them. The galaxy's most powerful factions began to react, and the ripple effect spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Thousands of ships, battle stations, and communications networks sprang into action as rumors swirled about humanity's sudden rise to prominence. What had once been dismissed as simple arrogance was now being treated as a dire warning. The peaceful civilizations scrambled to strengthen their defenses, while the more aggressive ones prepared for something far worse. On Earth, the message continued to echo through every communication channel. Captain Elias, now the de facto leader of humanity's most powerful fleet, stood at the command center, his eyes scanning the monitors. The message had already reached the far corners of the galaxy, but Elias knew it was only a matter of time before it would trigger a response from the alien empires. "We need to be ready," Elias said, his voice cutting through the tension that filled the room. "I don't know what this message means, but I know one thing for sure. Whatever comes next, it won't be good for us if we're unprepared." May, the young officer who had worked tirelessly to analyze the incoming data, looked up from her console. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with determination. "Captain, we've received a signal from the Gora Empire. It's encrypted, but I think it's a direct response to our message. They've sent a fleet to intercept us. They're calling it an Inquisition." An Inquisition. The word sent a chill through the room. The Gora Empire was one of the galaxy's most feared factions, a ruthless race known for their brutal conquests and absolute rule. If they were coming, it meant they were taking humanity's warning seriously, and that could only mean one thing: war. "Prepare the fleet," Elias commanded, his voice grim. "We need to be ready for a fight." As the fleet mobilized, a sense of dread settled over the crew. Humanity had never faced such an enemy before. The Gora Empire had wiped out entire civilizations without blinking an eye, their military prowess unmatched by anything humanity had ever known. But the one thing the Gora Empire didn't understand was that humanity was not like the other races they had crushed. They had underestimated the human spirit, and now they would pay the price. In the farthest reaches of the galaxy, on the edge of known space, a different response was brewing. The Sailor Collective, an ancient race of energy beings, had also intercepted the transmission. Unlike the Gora Empire, they were not a warlike species. Instead, they had long since evolved beyond physical form, existing as pure consciousness. The Sailor had watched humanity from the shadows, fascinated by their rapid development. They had never interfered, believing that humans needed to learn to navigate the galaxy on their own. But now, this message, this warning, was unlike anything they had ever seen. The Sailor's leader, a being known as the Eternal Mind, convened a council of the oldest and wisest of their kind. The message that had spread throughout the galaxy had reached them in an instant, and they had come to the conclusion that the time had come to act. The warning was not just for the galaxy. It was a signal to all sentient beings, a cry from the stars themselves. The XLR could feel the energy shifts across the cosmos. Something ancient had awoken, and it was not something that could be ignored. We must intervene. The Eternal Mind spoke, its voice a chorus of voices intertwined with 1,000 years of wisdom. This is not just a human problem. It is a matter of balance. If the galaxy has ignored humanity until now, we must ensure they understand the consequences of their apathy. But we must also tread carefully, for we do not know the true nature of what is coming. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Gora Empire, leaders gathered in their war council, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The message had instilled a deep fear among their ranks, a fear they were not accustomed to. For centuries, they had been the dominant force in the galaxy, crushing any opposition with brutal efficiency. But the message from Earth, a species they had once considered insignificant, had sparked something they had not expected: doubt. What do we know about this humanity? General Drax, the supreme commander of the Gora military, asked as he stood before a holographic map of the galaxy. They have no fleet to speak of. Their planet is fragile. How can they be a threat to us? One of the council members, a high-ranking advisor, spoke up. General, it's not their fleet that worries me. It's their potential. They have survived against impossible odds. They may be primitive, but their resilience is unmatched. And now, they've sent a message to the galaxy itself, warning us all. We would be wise to take that seriously. The room fell silent as the weight of the statement hung in the air. The Gora Empire had never encountered an enemy like this. They had underestimated humanity once, and now they would pay the price. Back on Earth, Captain Elias stood at the helm of the warship, his hands clenched into fists. He knew what was coming. He could feel it in his gut. The galaxy had answered humanity's message with fear, and that fear would soon turn into action. Humanity was no longer the weak, insignificant species they had once been. They were a force to be reckoned with, and whatever came next, Elias was ready to face it head-on. The days following humanity's final message were filled with tension and uncertainty. The calm before the storm was almost palpable, as the galaxy seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. On Earth, Captain Elias and his crew prepared for what was to come. They knew that the Gora Empire, one of the most ruthless and feared civilizations in the galaxy, was coming. The question was not if they would strike, but when. As Elias stood on the command deck of humanity's lone warship, the Valiant Horizon, the crew continued their preparations. The ship had been designed for deep space combat, but it had never faced an enemy like this before. Every officer, every crew member knew the stakes. This was humanity's last chance to prove that they were no longer the weak, insignificant species that the galaxy had long ignored. In the war room, Elias stood before a holographic display of the galaxy, his fingers hovering over the map of star systems. The Gora fleet had already entered human space, and their advance was swift, calculated. The ships they had sent were massive, dark behemoths, each one bristling with weapons and shields designed to annihilate anything in their path. They were an unstoppable force, and humanity's warship, the Valiant Horizon, was the only thing standing between them and Earth. "Captain, they're here," Mai, the communications officer, announced from her station. "The Gora fleet is within range." Elias's jaw tightened. The time for waiting was over. "Prepare the ship for battle," he ordered. "Engage all weapons systems. We hold them off here. Earth is counting on us." As the crew sprang into action, the warship powered up its engines, its weapons systems humming with energy. The entire ship shook with the force of the energy flowing through it. They were ready for whatever the Gora Empire could throw at them. But deep down, Elias knew that they were outmatched. One ship against an entire fleet. The odds were impossible. Yet, humanity had never backed down from a fight before, and this time would be no different. Elsewhere, aboard the Gora flagship, the Tyrant's Reign, General Drax stood before a holographic map of Earth's solar system. His eyes glinted with cold calculation. The final transmission from humanity had rattled his confidence, but it had also made him eager to crush this insignificant species once and for all. "General, we've encountered the Valiant Horizon," one of his officers reported. "It's the only ship they've sent. We've also detected a small fleet of support vessels, but they won't be able to put up much resistance." General Drax sneered. "So, it's true. They've sent only one ship to face us. How pathetic. But we will show them the futility of their defiance." Drax motioned for his officer to continue. "Order the fleet to engage the human ship. Leave nothing behind." The Gora fleet moved forward with terrifying speed, their massive ships creating ripples in the stars as they drew closer. They were a storm on the horizon, and their firepower was unmatched. Elias knew that no matter how skilled his crew was, they couldn't hold off the entire fleet forever. But then, something strange happened. As the Gora ships closed in, a low hum echoed throughout the Valiant Horizon. It wasn't just the ship's engines, it was something else, something that seemed to come from the very heart of the warship itself. The crew exchanged confused glances. Elias's eyes narrowed as he stepped forward, sensing that something was off. "What is that sound?" Elias asked, his voice filled with suspicion. May tapped into the ship's systems. "I don't know, Captain. It's coming from all over the ship, but I can't pinpoint the source." Just as Elias was about to order the crew to investigate further, a flash of light erupted across the starboard side of the ship. The Valiant Horizon rocked violently, throwing the crew to the ground. Warning sirens blared as the ship's shields flickered. "Damage report," Elias shouted. "Shields down to 45%, Captain," the chief engineer yelled. "Hull breach in Section 12. We're taking heavy fire." The Gora fleet had opened fire. The Valiant Horizon was holding its own for the moment. But Elias knew they couldn't keep this up for long. The ship's hull was already beginning to strain under the pressure, and their shields were weakening fast. "We need to get out of here," May shouted, her voice tinged with panic. "If we don't jump to hyperspace soon, we're going to be destroyed." But Elias was unmoved. He stared at the massive ships looming ahead of them, his mind racing. There was no escape. Running wasn't an option. Not anymore. "We're not running," Elias said firmly, his voice resolute. "This is our home, and we will fight for it. We're not backing down." Despite the odds, Elias ordered his crew to hold the line. The Valiant Horizon may have been outgunned, but it wasn't about the size of the ship. It was about the size of the heart that powered it. Humanity had faced impossible odds before and triumphed. It wasn't about winning. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity would never be pushed around again. As the battle raged on, Elias's mind kept racing. He knew they were outmatched. But there was one thing the Gora Empire didn't understand. Humanity was willing to fight to the last breath. And as long as they drew breath, they would not surrender. The Gora fleet pressed forward, relentless in its assault. But as the Valiant Horizon fired back, each shot a testament to humanity's defiance, Elias knew that this battle was far from over. It was only just beginning. The Valiant Horizon groaned as another blast from the Gora fleet hit its side, sending shockwaves through the entire ship. Captain Elias gripped the command chair tightly, his knuckles turning white. His eyes scanned the battlefield on the holographic display, an array of bright streaks cutting through the darkness of space as the Gora fleet continued their relentless assault. The odds were getting worse by the minute. Every shot they fired seemed to bring them one step closer to the inevitable. "We're losing shields fast." May's voice came through, urgent and panicked. "Only 20% left, Captain. If we don't retreat now, we won't have enough power to survive another wave of fire." But Elias didn't answer. His jaw was set, his face grim. He wasn't about to run. Not when they had come so far. Not when humanity's future hung in the balance. The Valiant Horizon was their last hope, their final weapon. If it fell, there would be no one left to stand against the Gora Empire. He knew it, and so did his crew. "Deploy the drones," Elias barked, breaking the tense silence. "All fighters, launch now. We're going to hold them off with everything we've got." The ship's hangar doors opened, and the fleet of small combat drones and fighter ships shot out into space. They were fast, agile, and packed with firepower. As they swarmed toward the approaching Gora fleet, they launched their own attacks, their lasers cutting through the cold void, leaving trails of light in their wake. But it wasn't enough. The Gora ships were simply too powerful, too well-coordinated. Each drone that struck its target was met with devastating retaliation. One by one, the smaller ships were torn apart, their pilots' last cries drowned out by the explosions. The crew of the valiant Horizon could only watch in helpless silence as their allies fell. It was a massacre. And yet, they continued to fight. It was all they could do. "Captain, we've got another problem," said Sergeant Tarek, the ship's weapons officer. "The Gora fleet's flagship, the Tyrant's Reign. It's moving into position. They're preparing for a direct strike on our hull. We won't survive another hit like that." Elias's heart sank. The Tyrant's Reign was a massive warship, the pride of the Gora fleet. Its weaponry was unmatched, its shields impenetrable. If that ship got too close, they would be doomed. "Engage evasive maneuvers. Full speed ahead. I want us to get behind the asteroid field now. It's our only chance." With the orders given, the valiant Horizon lurched forward, the engines screaming as they pushed the ship to its limit. The crew worked furiously, executing the evasive maneuvers Elias had commanded. The ship veered sharply to the left, ducking behind an asteroid belt that would provide temporary cover. For a moment, there was silence. The Tyrant's Reign couldn't fire on them without hitting the asteroids, and the Gora ships hesitated. "Are we safe?" May asked, her voice shaky. "For now," Elias said. His breath was heavy, but he refused to let the panic take hold. "But we won't last long in here. The Gora are too smart to fall for this forever." The tension was unbearable. The ship's crew knew they only had minutes, maybe less, before the Gora would find a way to track them down. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. And then, as if on cue, the eerie hum returned. It started softly, almost imperceptible at first. But then it grew, vibrating through the ship's hull, sending shivers down the spines of everyone on board. It was as if the ship itself was alive, pulsating with an unknown energy. Elias looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening. His crew was looking at each other in confusion and fear. Was this the ship's last breath, or something else entirely? "Captain," Mai said, her voice trembling. I think the ship's systems are reacting to the battle. It's like the valiant Horizon knows we're in danger." Elias's brow furrowed. He knew there had been rumors, myths even, about the ship's origins, about how it had been constructed from the remnants of an ancient warship, but no one had ever fully understood what those stories meant. But now, standing in the heart of the battle, Elias couldn't ignore the strange feeling that there was something more to the valiant Horizon than met the eye, something beyond human technology. The hum grew louder, almost deafening now. The walls of the warship seemed to shake. And then something incredible happened. From the depths of the ship's core, a blinding light erupted. The entire ship seemed to come to life, and its weapon systems powered up with a fury that took everyone by surprise. The valiant Horizon's cannons fired, and a single shot sliced through the asteroid field, crashing directly into one of the Gora battleships. It exploded in a burst of fiery destruction, leaving the crew of the valiant Horizon in stunned silence. The hum continued, now more of a roar, as if responding to the call of the ship itself. A second, then a third shot rang out, each one destroying another Gora ship in its path. The Tyrant's Reign was next. It shuddered under the barrage, its shields failing as the valiant Horizon unleashed hell. "Captain, what's happening?" Mai asked, her voice filled with awe and disbelief. "I don't know," Elias replied, his voice barely a whisper. "But it seems like the ship is fighting for us. It's responding to our will. The crew stared in shock as their warship, humanity's last hope, fought back with a strength they never knew it possessed. The Gora fleet, now in disarray, seemed to falter for the first time. But Elias knew this battle wasn't over. The real test was still to come. As the crew braced for the next wave of Gora forces, Elias turned his gaze back to the now glowing Valiant horizon. Whatever secret it held, it had awoken. And with it, humanity had a fighting chance. The Valiant horizon pulsed with energy, its systems coming online with an eerie precision that sent a shiver down the spines of every crew member. The once dead warship had now become something else entirely. Its weapons roared to life, launching precision strikes that tore through the Gora fleet with relentless power. The ship felt different, alive, almost as if it had been waiting for this very moment to awaken. Captain Elias stood at the helm, gripping the command chair with both hands, his eyes locked on the holographic map in front of him. The Gora ships were retreating, their formation breaking apart as they tried to regroup, but it was too late. The Valiant horizon had already taken control of the battlefield. "Keep pushing forward," Elias ordered, his voice commanding. "We have them on the run. Let's finish this." The crew, still in shock from the sudden shift in their fortunes, scrambled to execute the orders. May, the ship's chief engineer, looked at her console in disbelief. "Captain, I'm detecting a massive power surge from the central core. It's like the ship is amplifying its energy beyond anything we've seen before. This shouldn't be possible." Elias turned his attention to her, brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? Can we control it?" She hesitated. "I don't know, but the power is growing exponentially. It's as if the ship is tapping into something older than anything we've ever encountered." The crew was silent for a moment, each person absorbing the implications of May's words. The Valiant horizon was more than just a ship. It was a weapon, a force unlike anything they had imagined. But what was driving it? What secret had been hidden within its systems, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself? As the battle raged on, the Gora fleet continued to retreat, but they were not giving up. The Tyrant's Reign, the flagship of the Gora Empire, had not yet fallen. It was still a formidable force, and it was regrouping, its massive weaponry charging for another devastating strike. Elias knew they couldn't let the Gora fleet recover. They had to end this now, before the tide of battle shifted again. He glanced at the forward viewport, his eyes narrowing as the Tyrant's Reign came back into view, more dangerous than ever. "Prepare for a full assault," Elias commanded, his voice unwavering. "Target the flagship and disable their engines. We can't let them escape." The Valiant horizon surged forward, its engines roaring with raw power. The ship had never felt more alive, its systems working in perfect harmony with the crew's commands. As they drew closer to the Tyrant's Reign, the Gora flagship began firing again, sending heavy blasts toward the human warship. But the Valiant horizon was faster. It darted to the side, weaving between enemy fire, and in a single motion, its massive cannons fired, sending a blast of energy straight at the Tyrant's Reign. The shot landed directly on the flagship's engines, causing a massive explosion. The Tyrant's Reign lurched, its hull cracking as sparks flew from its main engine core. The Gora fleet's commander, General Narkar, could only watch in horror as his flagship began to break apart. "No!" Narkar screamed, his eyes wild with disbelief. "This is impossible." His fleet was crumbling, its once pristine organization falling apart in the face of humanity's relentless counterattack. The crew of the Valiant horizon had no intention of letting up. They pressed forward, unleashing every last ounce of energy the ship could muster. Captain Elias watched as the Gora ships began to scatter, their once proud fleet in disarray. But there was something troubling in his gut. They had won the battle, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like something else. Something much bigger was happening, something beyond their control. "Captain," Mai said, her voice trembling with awe, "the ship, it's reaching a critical point." The energy levels are off the charts. If we don't shut it down soon, the ship could explode. It's too much. We're pushing it too hard. Elias's heart skipped a beat. They had fought for so long, so hard, to get to this moment. Could it really end like this? With the ship they had come to rely on, humanity's last hope, destroying itself in a final act of desperation. "We don't have a choice," Elias replied grimly. "We finish this, or we all die." The valiant Horizon powered through, its weapons firing in rapid succession, tearing through the remaining Gora ships with deadly precision. The flagship's destruction had shattered the morale of the Gora fleet, and the remaining ships were no match for humanity's warship. But as the last Gora ship was destroyed, something strange happened. The valiant Horizon began to slow. The once constant hum of its engines faded, and the lights inside the ship flickered. The ship seemed to be struggling, as if it were out of breath. Elias could feel it. Something was wrong. "Captain, the core's collapsing." May's voice came over the comms, panic clear in her tone. "The ship is overheating. It's going to." Before she could finish, the entire ship rocked violently. The walls shook, and a deafening sound filled the air as the valiant Horizon shuddered, its massive form groaning under the strain. "Brace for impact," Elias shouted, gripping his chair as the ship buckled under the immense pressure. "All hands, brace for impact." The crew held on as the valiant Horizon began to break apart. The ship, which had once been humanity's savior, was now tearing itself apart, its core destabilizing from the overwhelming energy it had unleashed. The lights flickered, and the ship's systems began to fail one by one. And yet, despite the chaos around them, Captain Elias remained calm. He knew one thing: they had won. Humanity had struck a blow that the galaxy would never forget. And though the valiant Horizon might not survive the damage it had taken, its legacy would live on. As the ship's final moments played out in a series of flashes and sparks, Elias took a deep breath. "We've done it," he whispered. "We've won." And with that, humanity's last stand was over. The valiant Horizon drifted in the cold expanse of space, its hull scarred, its systems on the brink of total collapse. The battle was over. The Gora fleet had been shattered, but at what cost? The once mighty warship, humanity's last defender, had taken a heavy toll. Inside the dimly lit command center, Captain Elias stood alone, staring at the large viewport that offered a silent view of the wreckage. The remnants of the Gora fleet were still floating in space, some smoldering wrecks, others slowly tumbling into the darkness. They had done it. Humanity had won. But the victory felt hollow. The ship's systems were barely holding together, the power core dangerously unstable. Elias ran a hand through his hair, frustration mixing with exhaustion. He knew they had just a few minutes left before the valiant Horizon would be beyond saving. The once mighty warship that had carried humanity's hopes was now teetering on the edge of destruction. "We did it. But for how long?" Elias whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the dying hum of the ship. Suddenly, the calm was shattered by an alarm, a piercing siren blaring throughout the ship. The lights flickered and then died, leaving the crew in total darkness. The tension was palpable. They all knew what this meant. "Captain," May's voice broke through the darkness, sharp and urgent. "We need to get to the escape pods now. The core is failing." But Elias wasn't listening. His mind raced. He couldn't abandon the ship, not after everything they'd been through, not after everything the crew had sacrificed. "Stay with the ship," Elias ordered, his voice cold and unyielding. "We're not running. We're going to make sure this battle has meaning. This ship is going to send a message that no one will ever forget." The crew hesitated, fear creeping into their hearts. But they had followed Elias this far. They trusted him. And in that moment, they knew he wasn't about to leave them behind. May swallowed hard, trying to process what Elias was saying. "Captain, the core's at critical mass. It could go any second. If we stay, we'll die with the ship." "We're not just fighting for survival," Elias said, his eyes hard with resolve. "We're fighting for something bigger, for humanity's future. We're going to make sure the galaxy knows that humanity's strength isn't just in its firepower, it's in its resolve. We'll give them a message that will echo across the stars." Elias turned toward the central command console, his hands moving with practiced precision. He keyed in the command that would send the last signal, the final transmission to the galaxy. It wasn't just a distress signal. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a declaration, a statement that would echo for centuries. As the transmission began to broadcast, the ship's hull groaned, the pressure building with every passing second. Elias could feel the ship trembling beneath his feet, and in his gut, he knew it was the last thing he would ever do. He didn't care. "We are humanity," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We are the last ones standing. And if you threaten us again, if you think we're weak, you'll regret it. This is our galaxy, and we will fight to the very end." The message shot out into the void, a beacon of defiance in the silent expanse of space. The final words would be heard across the stars by any who dared to listen. Humanity had made its stand, and the galaxy would remember it. But as the final signal broadcasted, the valiant horizon shook violently. A series of explosions rang out across the ship, tearing through the already damaged systems. The ship's walls buckled, and the entire structure seemed to collapse in on itself. Elias clung to the console, the shaking too violent to ignore. The crew braced for impact, but they knew there was no escape from what was coming. "Captain," Mai shouted, fear overtaking her voice, "it's too late. We have to go. Now." But Elias was already standing, staring at the final data on the console. The message had been sent. The galaxy had heard humanity's voice. "Let them hear us," he said, his voice resolute. And with that, the valiant horizon exploded in a flash of light, a final, magnificent burst of energy that spread across the stars. It would be seen by anyone who dared to look. The warship had given everything, and in its death, it had given humanity something more valuable than ever before, a name, a purpose, and a future that could never be ignored. The explosion resonated across the galaxy, lighting up the skies like a dying star. In that final moment, humanity had left its mark. The galaxy would never be the same again. The message had been sent, and now the reckoning would begin. The valiant horizon was no more. What had once been humanity's last and greatest warship now lay scattered in the dark void of space. Its explosion had sent shockwaves across the galaxy, a message heard in every corner, every empire, every civilization. The stars themselves seemed to tremble as the echo of humanity's final stand reverberated through the universe. The explosion had been monumental, so intense that it reached the furthest galaxies, a brilliant flash of light that left a lasting imprint on the fabric of space. Those who had witnessed it firsthand knew it wasn't just a warship's destruction. It was a statement. Humanity was not to be trifled with. It was a challenge, a declaration of power, and the galaxy would never forget it. On distant planets, leaders of galactic empires and distant races who had long underestimated humanity's potential now stood in silent horror. The message had been clear. Humanity was no longer a species to ignore. They were not the fragile, primitive race many had believed them to be. One such leader, a high chancellor from a distant star system, watched the feed from his throne room, his face pale, his hands shaking. He had heard the stories, of course, but no one had imagined humanity had this kind of power. Their fleets had always been modest, their technology primitive compared to the grandeur of galactic empires. But the destruction of the valiant horizon, and the message it sent, shattered all those perceptions. "We've made a grave mistake," the High Chancellor muttered, his voice hoarse with fear. He turned to his advisors, who were gathered in tense silence. "Humanity isn't just a threat. They've shown us they can do the unimaginable. The question now is, what will they do next?" Across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place. Fear was spreading like wildfire. The greatest empires that had ruled with ease for centuries now found themselves questioning their strategies. They had once believed that their size and military might make them invulnerable. But in a single act, humanity had undone everything they knew about power. Meanwhile, in the deepest sectors of the human fleet, the survivors of the valiant Horizon watched the galaxy react to their final transmission. The captain was dead, the ship was gone, but their message lived on. Humanity had sent its final warning. And now, the universe had to face the consequences. Mai, one of the surviving officers, stood at the helm of the Eagle's Wing, a smaller but still formidable warship. She had been one of the last to escape the valiant Horizon before its destruction. Her mind raced as she processed what had just happened. They had done it. They had made their mark. But what now? Captain Elias would be proud. She whispered to herself, "Humanity is no longer invisible. We are a force to be reckoned with." The crew aboard the Eagle's Wing exchanged silent glances. They knew the galaxy would never look at them the same way again. The humans, once seen as weak and fragile, were now the most dangerous species in the universe. "Captain," Mai called out, her voice steady but carrying the weight of what they had just accomplished. "What do we do now?" The captain of the Eagle's Wing, a battle-hardened veteran named Leona, stepped forward. Her eyes were fierce, full of determination. "We do what we've always done. We fight. And we wait." "Wait for what?" Mai asked, confused. Leona's gaze shifted to the stars outside the viewport. For the galaxy to realize that humanity isn't just a threat. We're their reckoning. And when they come to us, when they realize what we're capable of, we'll be ready. As Mai looked out at the darkened expanse of space, she understood. The valiant Horizon had set something into motion that could never be undone. The galaxy would come to them, sooner or later. They would demand answers. But humanity had made its statement, and now the universe would learn the truth. They weren't the weak, insignificant race they had once been considered. They were warriors. They were survivors. They were humanity. And now, every empire, every species that had once thought they could ignore them, would have to reckon with the consequences of their mistake. The galaxy was not ready for what was coming, and humanity was prepared for the battle ahead. The last transmission from the valiant Horizon had set a chain of events into motion. The galaxy had received humanity's warning. And now, as the stars shimmered above, the silence of the cosmos was broken by the quiet, inevitable march of humanity's vengeance.